And when it comes to 3D content creation, we all know that material plays a huge role. And if you're an artist looking for a free tool that can allow you to do just that, today we're going to be exploring the brand new Material Maker 1.5. As this new release comes with some interesting features that seems to be challenging industry standard tools, and with most developers and creators switching to this, it just simply makes sense to explore this tool, as this is a powerful free and open source procedural material authoring and 3D texture painting tool. And the Material Maker by default is a node-based material creation application which is built on the Godot engine. So this allows you to create PBR materials through visual programming, which simply means that you connect a couple of nodes to generate and transform textures in real time. And for those who like to get this, you can simply go over to the link in the description that's going to bring you right here where you can see this for yourself. The new version now comes with over 200 nodes which you can now work with. Previously, we did demo how you can create PBR materials with this, and this version makes it even more easier. There's a library of community assets that comes with hundreds of materials, nodes, brushes, and environment which you can take full advantage of. And in terms of texture painting, this also offers a bit of that as well, although this is still in its experimental stage, but only time will tell how good this will become. And like we mentioned, this is free and open source, so it means that you can get this for free. So to get this for free is pretty easy. All you need to do is come here, click on download now, and you can come through and click on download now one more time. It's going to ask you, to donate. However, if you just want to use the tool, you can simply click on no thanks, just take me to download, and it's going to bring you right here where you can download for Windows, Linux, and Mac. So by default, Material Maker, especially version 1.5, is what I would simply consider as one of the best alternatives to Substance Designer when it comes to free and open source tools that you can work with. So once you open this, basically what you're getting, especially in terms of UI, is pretty similar to Substance Designer. So if you go all the way here, you would see we've got different kinds of nodes, and you can also preview to see some community nodes as well. So just in case, you're not satisfied with the ones you have here, if you want to see more, you can simply come through and check out all of these other ones. To anyone that you want, you can have them selected, click on OK, and this is going to be brought right in here. And so you can just go ahead and connect this output right to the albedo, and there you have it. It is there, and you can just go ahead and preview it. And speaking of a preview, if you're new to Material Maker, then how you can navigate across this is pretty simple. So right here is where you have your 3D view, where you can see stuff in 3D. And by the way, you can also change this. If you want this to automatically rotate, you press the playback button, you get that rotation. You can stop that if you want. And right here is where you have a 2D preview. So this is your second 2D preview. Here is where you have references if you like to reference images, possibly for colors and stuff. Right here is where you have the main 2D preview. You've got your canvas right here. And over here is where you can also do some stuff. You can zoom in and zoom out. So prior to this time, we actually went ahead to bring out the grid, and how you bring out the grid is this simple. So you can turn on the grid and you can turn it off as well. You can turn it on, you can turn on snapping, turn off snapping if you want, and you can also increase the grid size and reduce it. If you like to make changes to this connector, you can also make changes to the connector like so, and you can also play with the thickness depending on how you like your node graph to look like. So you do have all of that. For 2D and 3D, this is in case you like to visualize your 2D or your 3D on this background. So to do that is to simply click, and you can see that, and you can click, of course, and you can see this as well. Over here is where you have your libraries, and your libraries are in different segments. So you do have the simple stuff, the 3D stuff, the pattern, the noise, the filters, the transform, the workflow, and miscellaneous. And you can also access them by clicking any of these buttons, which is pretty interesting. And when you build stuff, you get to find the hierarchy here. And just like we mentioned, you can also access more nodes by simply clicking on community. However, if you like to learn how you can work with this by taking a look at some examples, of course you can. So you can actually go over to file, go over to where you have load, and this is going to pop up the default window where you fired it up from. So once you have that, you can go over to where you have examples, and from the examples, you can launch stuff. So we can go ahead and bring in Beehive, and you can see that right here. So let's simply zoom right in, and you can see how beautiful this looks. So from here, you can actually tell how this was made. But of course, if you like to build yours, you can. So you do have a lot of things that you can use to build your very own stuff. So starting off, if we would like to start making cool stuff, you can start with shape, for example, and we select the rays and we drag this in. If we have this selected, we can do some ray stuff, we can increase that, we can reduce that. You do have all of this, and you can mix these things to create impressive stuff. Let me show you. If we go down to where we have patterns, And say, for example, we just simply get a skewed brick or even a simple, nice looking brick. Let's actually get this brick in here. If we drag and drop this in, you would notice, let's actually zoom all the way out. You would notice that we can use this to drive stuff. So if I drag this in and connect this to the motor, I want you to notice that this starts helping to shape how this looks. We'll use the bevels to push things a little bit further and maybe just make a little bit of change there. These things can now drive stuff as they're just basically black and white images, which means they can be used to drive various parameters. So from here, we can make changes. We can say maybe we like the English brown bricks, or we just want the running bond bricks. We can use this to do stuff. In terms of text, if you're thinking about using text, of course, there's a couple of nice text here. So first off, let's talk about images, then we'll look at text. So with the image, once we have this image in here, we can bring in various images. If we click, we can find images and we can load them in and we can use those images to drive stuff. Now to each of these images that you have here, you can connect this image directly to your albedo. And you can also connect transforms. So if we would like to transform this, of course, you can have this and connect that. And then you can drop the size, say 0.5, for example. And that way we can have this all the way down. If you want this to repeat, what you need to do is instead of bringing like a repeat node or stuff with the transform, you can just change this to repeat and this automatically repeats. If you like this to extend with the transform, you can also do that. But in this case, we're simply going to keep this as clamp. Now for text, if you like to bring in text, you can. You can get a text from here, drag and drop it right in here, and we could change this to MM 1.5, which is basically, the Material Maker 1.5. Now, how do we mix these two together? Now, to mix these two together, what we'll be needing is a blend node. So we're just simply going to get a simple blend. And with this simple blend, what we want is for the transform to be the background while this stays on the top. And then we would connect this all the way there. Now, once we do this connection, you would notice everything seems to be a little bit faint. 50% of what we have here for the text and 50% of what we have here. And that is where this opacity comes in. So we can send this all the way back or send this forward. Now, if we like to see these things, what we can do is to click and change these to screen. And that way we'll be able to see the both of them because we're simply screening out the black. And if we would like to move this to a certain location, we can because we do have nice handles now. So we can use that and possibly just eyeball this and position this right here. And with that there, we can also increase the size and, essentially just move this to a given point like so. And of course, with this, we can also do other things like maybe getting the normal out. Maybe we like to just generate normals out of this. We can automatically generate normals out of this, drag, drop into the normal, and there you go. And once you crank this up, the more you would see the normal. And one cool thing that you might have also noticed is here. If you click and drag and let go, you can now search for various nodes. So for example, if we're looking for that brick node that we wanted before, we can either just click and drag, or we can just right click and then type in brick, for example, and then we have that. Or we can just simply right click and type in the word noise, and we have noise. And we can also use this noise to drive stuff. So maybe we would like to use the noise to drive the opacity. We can. So we can just use that noise, drive the opacity, or we can simply use the noise to drive maybe the roughness of our material altogether. So these things are right here. The color coding that you notice on all of these actually represents something. The way this has been built is you can simply pick one of these and connect it, and it will find a way to manage that connection. And that is why sometimes you get to see, we're moving from this output over to this one, and you notice that tiny color change as it travels through. One other thing which you'd notice is to each of these materials that you have, or to each of the PBRs that you have, if you simply right click, you can change them. And all of these would have different parameters that you can definitely work with. Depending on where you're trying to export, these will come in extremely handy. We've actually gone ahead to do some more stuff. Then right over here, what we did was the very same noise that we had, we just added a bit of, bevel to it. And if we have this selected, you can see the bevel. We can crank that in and bring that out as well. If we change these to something a bit bigger, you can see the bevel in action. So we can bring this in, bring that out, all of that cool stuff. So we do have those bevels, And then we threw in a bit of Colourise. Now Colourise is what you can use to actually color your stuff. So once you double click, you can color this however you want. And if you do have references, you can load in a reference image right here. Actually, let's go ahead and load in one. So we can drag and drop in reference image, and we can use these, which is the pick colors, to actually generate gradients. So we can use it to generate a gradient from this, and we can use that to drive the Colourise. And you can actually use that for a lot of things. So if we bring in the beehive, for example, and then we throw in a Colourise, click, drag, and drop it in there, and automatically you have that. So it is that simple. Now for the environment, there is a tiny button right here which you can use to select various environments, and normally this is turned on, so you have to turn it off if you like to see the background, and it is that easy. Now once you're done with this, you can easily export this by going over to File, go over to Export Material, and you can export for Blender, Godot, Unity, Unreal Engine, or simple quick export. Now if you like to do a quick export, what you can do is to right click and type in the word export and click on miscellaneous and export, and this pops out. And from here, we would like to export this all the way out, and potentially we would also like to export another one. So I'm just going to do a copy and paste. And because we would like to export the normal map, we can also go ahead. And now that we have these two export files, I'm just going to name this albedo, and this other one we would name normal. And to export this is very simple. Have it selected, go over to File, go over to Export Material, Export. Define the folder you want, save to folder, and automatically that exports it. And once you have that done, if you have them selected, you will be able to see the files that you just exported. And with this, you can now bring them into your favorite DCC app of choice and apply them onto any surface and play with them however you want. And this is one of those ways that you can get stuff going with this. And while we're still talking about textures, let's take a look at something. You possibly may remember that during our intro, we did show some animated textures. Now, for you to be able to create animated textures is pretty easy. You just need a bit of maths and a few stuff to get things going. So by default, you may have seen these examples and you can actually go and understudy them. I would definitely recommend you understudy most of these examples, as this would help you get going with making materials here. And in our case, if we like to make simple animated materials, how you can do that is fairly easy. We can start with maybe array. We can just drag that out. And because this is a shape layer, we can actually copy and paste that and change it to something else. Maybe we'd like to make this a circle, for example. We can have that. And with this, we can play with the size, and we can also play with the radius itself. We can also go in and bring in a simple math node, which we can throw in. So with this math node, if we have this selected, say a plus b, in this case, we're actually not going to dial in anything because we like sort of animated playback to control this. And that is where the whole animation thing comes in. So if we have that, we can also go in and get another math node, and we can now drive things a bit more interesting. So right here, what we want is we would like time. So we'll put in the $ time times, for example, 0.5. We want the time to animate this. And if we go ahead and connect this right onto our albedo, you possibly wouldn't notice anything. So for this to work, we might want to use either a simple fraction and get things going. So once we do that, you would now see that we have some sort of animation going on right there. Or we can do a simple ping pong. So it goes forward, backwards, stuff like that. So if we go all the way down and get a ping pong, we can use a ping pong to actually control this. And in this case, I can increase the value that we have here, maybe set this to about 0.2. And then the second value, we can make it 0.5, which is pretty much the same thing like we had with the fraction. So with this now, you do have very nice stuff that you can work with. You can also go ahead and do the same Colourise stuff that we talked about earlier if you like to have colors in here. So we can do a simple Colourise. And once we connect this, we can click on that, change the color. Maybe we want this to be red, and then we might want this to be some other color, maybe green, blue, yellow. So we can actually go ahead and have this done. And so with that done, if we have this selected, there you go. You've got your animated stuff. If you like to clamp things, or maybe you like to merge things together, we already talked about the blend node. So you can also go in and get the simple blend node in here, and you can blend these two together. So for this one, we might want this to be the background, and this becomes the foreground, and then we can simply connect this all the way there. And there you have it. you have yourself something that is pretty interesting. And with this, you can now create animated textures. And there's just a lot of examples out there that you can explore with, as they would help you master this tool even more. And a bit more of an extended stuff that you find here are some 3D models. So if you go over to the 3D section, you'll be able to find various stuff. We do have a box here, which you can actually select, and you can do some nice rotation to the box if you want. You can rotate this box in different axes. That is pretty cool. You also have more shapes. So you do have various shapes. In this case, we can get a cylinder, we can get a torus as well. We do have a render stuff as well, which we can work with. So you can actually just go ahead and connect these two together so you can actually see the torus when it's rendered. If you have a torus or any of these parametric looking 3D models selected, right here within the preview 2D, you will be able to make adjustments. So we can adjust the inner and the outer radius. Same thing can also be said for the cylinder. We can also increase, reduce, move these things around. And it is pretty interesting to see that a free open source tool like this has all of these features. Now, outside this, there's also another impressive stuff that this tool currently does. And it is the fact that you can texture paint. Although this is still in experimental, but it is worth exploring so that you guys can have an idea just in case you like to try it. And to get things going is pretty simple. All you need to do is go over to File, go all the way to New Paint Project. And once you have this selected, you would need to define the model file, which in this case, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the meshes that comes with this and select Susan. And from here, we can click on OK. And once we have this ready, we can start doing stuff. The UI is pretty easy to navigate. We've got our gigantic viewport right here. We've got our node graph section. We have our 2D texture canvas. Parameters exist here. Layers exist here. And you've got some brushes and stuff. Your brush settings exist right here, and you can make changes to them if you want. So we can increase and we can reduce and we can play with different angles. Again, this is still in its early and experimental phase. So expect bugs and, things like that. Right here is where you can add layers. There are 3 types of layers that you can add with this. If you click, you have a simple paint layer, which is what we have. We have a procedural layer. You cannot see that because it's outside the screen. And we have our mask layer. So you can have all 3 layers. Right here is where you can duplicate stuff and you can delete them. So we can delete them if we want. And how do you actually start painting? Now, by default, if you have this selected and you want to paint, what you're going to be painting is just pure white, which might not necessarily be the color that you like to paint. And so for you to be able to paint stuff is you have to double click on the uniform to drag in the uniform paint material. And this is where you can start defining and painting stuff. Now, to each layer that you're about to paint on, you need to define the properties or parameters that you like to paint on that layer for you to actually proceed properly. So in this case, I'm just going to call this our albedo. And that is what it's going to be. So we'll turn this off. And so we can go in and paint our albedo of red. So it's just going to be albedo of red right here. So I'm just going to paint like so. And let's just leave things the way they are. Let's just make it one-sided red. Over here, you would notice that this is invisible. The reason is simple, that this was looking at the previous file that we're working with before and not this current one. And so for this current one, it will be this albedo. And once we have that selected, you can see it. We can add a new paint layer. And this paint layer could actually be maybe emission. So we can call this emit, for example. And then we can define stuff. So for this emission layer, we might want to paint maybe blue, for example. We'd like to emit blue. We can have that selected. And if we come right here, make sure that we have this turned off. And we're looking at that. If we come right here and start painting, we would paint blue. Now, you may have noticed a little bit of bug with the painting and also with the brush itself. And like I mentioned earlier, these are things that are currently on the works, and hopefully over time, this is going to be rectified and, made fully available. So in this case, you can paint your properties how you want and use them for cool stuff. If you click on the plus sign one more time, we can add procedural layers, and this procedural layer is where we can throw in some patterns, some effect, all of this cool stuff, and drive our overall materials with it. And one more thing which I think a lot of you guys may have missed, which again would come in very handy, is we did talk about having all of these materials and some community materials. However, if you click on File, you would notice that we have load material from website. And if you click on that, this is going to load most of the materials that exist on your website directly onto your PC. And that is one way to get it going. However, if you like to get this going right from the website, once you go over to the website, you can click on assets, and all of these assets are open source and available for you to use. So whether you're thinking about materials, brushes, nodes, environment stuff, they're all available, and you can simply download them and bring them into your tool and work with them. So this is it for those who are thinking about checking out Material Maker, or potentially you're thinking about exploring a new free open source material tool. Then this is one cool tool that is currently available that you can get totally for free. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section, and I'd like to see you guys in the next one. Peace.